Tonight, a major diplomatic moment unfolding on the world stage, and it may have exposed deeper fractures between the United States and Europe than many are willing to admit. At the Munich Security Conference in Germany, Senator Marco Rubio addressed Allied leaders with a message centered on unity, shared values, and strengthening transatlantic ties. That part is confirmed. His remarks were covered by NPR and CBS News, and the speech emphasized cooperation between the U.S. and European partners. But here's the question now being quietly asked in diplomatic circles. Did his framing land the way Washington intended? In the next 60 seconds, I'm going to walk you through exactly what's confirmed, what's being claimed, and the one detail most coverage is skipping that changes how this unfolds. Stay with me, because once you see how these pieces connect, the entire situation looks very different. Before we go deeper, if you value fact-based breakdowns without the noise, subscribe and turn on notifications. We follow developments like this closely, and we update when facts change. Here's what we know. Rubio's speech emphasized that the United States and Europe remain bound by history, defense cooperation, and strategic alignment. He underscored NATO commitments and the importance of confronting global instability together. That's the official framing. But multiple European leaders, speaking publicly and privately, stressed what they call strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe must build independent defense and security capabilities rather than rely solely on U.S. leadership. That contrast matters, because if one side is talking about reaffirming leadership and the other is signaling independence, that's not just a rhetorical difference, that's a structural one. And here's where it gets more complicated. According to analysis published in The Atlantic, some critics argue Rubio may have mischaracterized Europe's recent defense posture, suggesting weakness where European governments believe they have strengthened militarily since 2022. We'll separate confirmed reporting from opinion in just a moment. But first, the key issue. Was this a routine diplomatic speech, or a signal that Washington and Brussels are no longer reading from the same strategic script? Let's begin with what is firmly established through reporting from NPR, CBS News, and additional European coverage of the Munich Security Conference. Marco Rubio delivered formal remarks at the 2026 Munich Security Conference in Munich, Germany. That is confirmed. The annual conference brings together global political leaders, defense officials, diplomats, and security experts to discuss transatlantic cooperation and emerging threats. In his speech, Rubio emphasized the importance of the NATO alliance and reaffirmed the United States' commitment to collective defense. He stated that the U.S. and Europe remain bound by shared democratic values and long-standing military cooperation. CBS News reported that Rubio framed the alliance as essential to confronting global instability, including ongoing tensions involving Russia and broader security challenges in Eastern Europe. NPR similarly noted that his remarks highlighted unity and deterrence. Rubio also referenced the need for allies to continue strengthening defense spending and maintaining readiness. That is consistent with long-standing bipartisan U.S. messaging toward NATO members. Now here's another confirmed development. Several European leaders, including senior officials from Germany and France, publicly reiterated their support for NATO, but also emphasized what they call European strategic autonomy. That phrase refers to Europe building stronger independent defense capabilities alongside NATO cooperation. This is not new rhetoric. European officials have used this term in recent years, particularly following shifts in U.S. foreign policy posture and debates over burden sharing within the alliance. Multiple outlets reported that discussions at Munich included Europe's defense spending increases since 2022. Data from NATO has shown that more European member states have met or moved closer to the 2% GDP defense spending benchmark compared to prior years. That is confirmed. There were no official walkouts, no diplomatic ruptures, and no formal rebukes issued against Rubio during the conference. Those claims are not supported by verified reporting. However, the tone of post-speech commentary in European media reflected ongoing debate about the balance of power within the alliance. So at this stage, what we have are confirmed remarks emphasizing unity, and confirmed European messaging emphasizing both cooperation and independence. The facts stop there. The interpretation begins next. Now we move from confirmed reporting into interpretation. And this is where discipline matters. The Atlantic published an analysis arguing that Rubio doesn't get it when it comes to Europe's current defense posture. That is opinion commentary, not a factual finding. The piece claims that Europe has significantly increased defense spending and reduced reliance on U.S. leadership since 2022, particularly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The underlying data on increased European defense spending is real. NATO reporting shows more member states meeting or approaching the 2% GDP target. That's verified. Where interpretation enters is the suggestion that Rubio's framing implied Europe remains strategically weak or overly dependent. Rubio's speech, as reported by NPR and CBS, emphasized partnership and collective strength. He did not formally accuse Europe of failing to act. However, he reiterated the importance of burden sharing, language that historically signals U.S. concern about defense contributions. So here's the distinction. Confirmed fact: Europe has increased defense budgets since 2022. Confirmed fact: Rubio called for continued commitment and strength within NATO. Analysis claim: his framing may have understated Europe's progress. Those are not the same category of statements. There's also the broader diplomatic context. European leaders have increasingly discussed strategic autonomy, meaning the ability to operate militarily and politically without total reliance on Washington. That rhetoric has intensified in recent years, particularly amid shifts in U.S. domestic politics and uncertainty about future American administrations. Some commentators suggest Rubio's speech did not fully acknowledge this European shift. But here's what's important. There is no verified evidence that Rubio's remarks directly damaged NATO agreements, altered defense commitments, or triggered formal diplomatic consequences. What we're seeing instead is a narrative contest. One side frames the speech as reassurance, another frames it as outdated positioning. And here's the gap worth noting. Most mainstream coverage focused on the unity language, not on the subtle divergence in long-term strategic vision. That divergence may be the real story, because if Europe is quietly preparing for greater independence while Washington continues speaking in terms of leadership, that's not a collapse, but it is a recalibration. And recalibrations matter. Now we examine the power dynamics behind this moment, because speeches at the Munich Security Conference are never just speeches. They are signals, carefully constructed messages meant for allies, adversaries, and domestic audiences. So who is accountable for the messaging and what are the institutional stakes? First, Marco Rubio spoke as a senior U.S. political figure addressing foreign leaders. While he does not currently hold executive authority over foreign policy, his remarks carry weight in international perception. When prominent U.S. officials speak abroad, allies interpret that language as a reflection of potential future policy direction. That matters. Second, European leaders are operating under their own strategic recalculations. Since 2022, multiple European governments have accelerated defense investment, expanded military coordination, and discussed reducing long-term dependency on American leadership. Those shifts are documented in NATO data and European policy statements. So when U.S. rhetoric emphasizes unity under traditional American leadership and European rhetoric emphasizes autonomy, there is a subtle but meaningful power negotiation taking place. Now let's separate fact from interpretation again. Confirmed. European defense spending has risen. Confirmed. European leaders are publicly discussing greater strategic independence. Confirmed. Rubio emphasized alliance unity and burden sharing. The tension arises not from what was said directly, but from what was not fully addressed. If Europe is preparing for a more multipolar security structure, while Washington continues framing NATO primarily through a U.S.-led model, that creates friction over time. Who benefits from that friction? Adversaries watch closely. Russia and China both monitor alliance cohesion. Public signals of divergence, even rhetorical ones, can influence strategic calculations. At the same time, European governments benefit domestically from signaling independence to their own voters. U.S. leaders benefit domestically from emphasizing strength and leadership. So this becomes a layered accountability question. Is this a diplomatic misalignment, or is it calculated positioning for separate audiences? There is no confirmed evidence of institutional failure here. No treaty violations, no broken commitments. But power is not just about agreements. It's about perception. And perception in global politics often precedes policy shifts. So where does this leave us? Here are the confirmed facts. Marco Rubio spoke at the Munich Security Conference and reaffirmed U.S. commitment to NATO and transatlantic cooperation. European leaders publicly echoed support for the alliance while simultaneously emphasizing strategic autonomy and increased independent defense capability. There was no formal rupture, no treaty violation, no official diplomatic rebuke. But there was a visible shift in tone. And tone, in global politics, is often the first indicator of structural change. The core question is not whether Rubio intended to undermine U.S. standing. There is no verified evidence of that. The question is whether Washington and European capitals are now operating from slightly different strategic assumptions. The United States continues to speak in terms of alliance leadership and collective defense under established frameworks. Europe increasingly speaks in terms of autonomy, diversification, and reduced dependency. Those two visions can coexist, for now. But if European defense integration accelerates while American political rhetoric continues to fluctuate depending on domestic elections, allies may hedge more aggressively. That's the long-term watch point. Second, watch NATO spending commitments over the next 12 months. If European members continue increasing defense budgets beyond the 2% threshold, that signals structural independence, not symbolic positioning. Third, watch diplomatic language. If future U.S. leaders begin adopting Europe's strategic autonomy framing rather than emphasizing leadership hierarchy, that would indicate recalibration rather than friction. For now, what we have is not collapse, but recalibration. And recalibrations, when handled carefully, strengthen alliances. Handled poorly, they widen cracks. This story is still developing. We will continue separating verified reporting from interpretation as more information becomes available. Subscribe for updates. We follow the facts.